my guest is Dr. Karen Bluth, a good friend who I've known for over a decade now. And she is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina. She's trained as a developmental psychologist like me, so we kind of live somewhat parallel lives. She's conducted a huge amount of research on self-compassion. In fact, I think I've told you this before, Karen. Next to me, you are the second most prolific researcher on self-compassion in the world. You've got, tens of dozens of articles on self-compassion. And your specialty, what Karen's specialty is research on adolescents. I mean, she's done a lot of varied research, but her real focus, and I would say her contribution to the field of psychology, is researching self-compassion and its influence on emotional well-being in adolescents and also young adults. And in fact, she was the 2022 recipient of the Mind and Life Foundation Award for Public Communication of Contemplative Research. So in other words, she's kind of a big deal in the research world. And Karen is also a mindful self-compassion teacher and co-creator of the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teen programs, which we'll be talking about, which is really an adaptation of MSE for adolescents. And also another adaptation for young adults called Embracing Your Life. She's written many, many books, including the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens, the Self-Compassionate Teen, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion for Teen ADHD. And then recently this summer, her latest book is called Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens in Schools, a 16-session social and emotional learning curriculum. So thank you so much, Karen, for coming on tonight and sharing your expertise with us here.
Well, I am thrilled to be here, Kristin, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So why self-compassion and why teens? Why did those two intersect for you to become your real calling in life?
Yeah, well, before I did this work, I was a classroom teacher for almost 20 years, the last 10 years or so with teens, 3 years in fifth grade and 7 years in middle school. And I saw how much teens struggled and how hard it was, how hard it was just dealing with the difficulties of that developmental stage. At the same time, I had a long-standing mindfulness practice that I had had since I was a teen. And so, and I knew how much my own practice had helped me throughout, all the challenges that we have as adults throughout my life. And I knew that this could be helpful for teens. So in 2008, I went back to school, my PhD, and I knew I wanted to study adolescence, and I started doing a little bit of digging in the research world. And that time there was some mindfulness work, some mindfulness literature articles published uh, um, with teens. And that's when I came across your work, Kristin. And around that time was just, your early work on self-compassion. And didn't see anything that was about teens and self-compassion. And so I decided that's what I wanted to work on. And my dissertation was Mindfulness and Self-Compassion, Exploring Pathways to Adolescent Well-Being. And so, what I saw from that research, that very initial research, was that there were correlations similar to what was found in the adult work, that there are correlations between self-compassion and all kinds of aspects of emotional well-being. And so, of course, the next step then was, well, if this is good for teens, if we know that the more self-compassionate they are, the less anxiety and depression, excuse me, and the better mood they have overall, well, it's a no-brainer. We should teach them how to cultivate these skills, self-compassion.
Right. And so do you see teens as like just mini adults in terms of like the same benefits, the same issues, or what's unique about teens, not only in terms of how the role it might play in their lives, and also maybe, how to approach self-compassion with teens? What have you seen? Because you've also, by the way, taught a lot of mindful self-compassion to adults as well. So you kind
Mhm.
of know each population. What's unique about teens?
Yeah, it's very different. It's very different, and it's not, and they're not many adults, they're
Yeah,
they're
I knew
definitely
that, but
yeah, yeah, I figured you knew that. Yeah, so they're struggling with unique uh, tasks that to work through in this particular developmental stage. Erickson talks about identity, figuring out who they are, where they belong, what's their niche in life. And these days in particular, and besides all of that, that's kind of the standard developmental stage. But besides all that, these days, it's so much harder being a teen, certainly than, you know, when I was a teen. Um, your teens today have to deal with the stress, and they talk about this, and this comes out in the research of climate change, for example, of um, gun violence in their schools. And, these are things that I never had to worry about, of the unbelievable amount of divisiveness, political divisiveness in our country that, at least if that was going on when I was a teen, I wasn't aware of it.
Mhm.
So, and then of course there's social media, and that's, a whole huge thing unto itself, how, because of the way that it promotes social comparison. So, it's really hard. It's really a rough road being a teen today. And I tell teens this, every time I teach, it's like, you know what? If you're feeling anxious and you're feeling depressed or sad or lonely or whatever it is, it's not your fault. It is not your fault. We're living in a crazy world right now.
Yeah, and so I think what you're pointing to really is, and this was kind of I did just one study on adolescence, but this idea of, it's called the personal fable, which is often the idea when, especially when you're an adolescent, you feel like no one else could understand what I'm going through because there's not the experience yet of relationships with other people to let you know that what you're going through is not unique. So when you're teaching teens, do you find that that idea of common humanity, of connectedness to others is particularly strong or
Yeah.
useful?
Yeah, I think it's really strong. In fact, I've been asked to teach teens individually, and I won't do it because of that, because I feel
Interesting.
like they get so much out of being with each other. Um,
Hmm.
it's really eye-opening for them to realize that, in fact, other teens, their friends, are going through the same kinds of struggles that they are. Sometimes some teens have a little inkling of that, but a lot of times they don't. We do this one exercise in our self-compassion course for teens, where all the teens are on one side of a rope, and we put this rope down. Everybody's on one side, and we say, um, cross over if you've ever been bullied, and so, really most of the teens cross over and say, look around, notice what you're seeing. And then we might say, cross over if you've ever compared your body to that of a friend, and look
Mhm.
around, notice how many people, this, endorse this, how many people this is true for. And we go through that, and we do it with a number of different things. And most of the time, they are just floored. They say how eye-opening it is for them because they had no idea that, you know, like the popular kid over there was, also struggled with feeling left out or feeling bullied. It's really the common humanity piece is really eye-opening for them.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I've never heard you say that before, that you won't even teach a kid on their own because the social bit is so important. That makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
And then recently, you've done a lot of really great research with the LGBTQ plus community and transgender teens as well. I mean, amazing finding, for instance, showing that it reduces suicidal ideation. So can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that research and also just your experience and how self-compassion seems, can be a lifesaver in that case? Yeah.
Yeah, well, the thing that we know about, and these were trans teens, and transgender diverse teens.
Uh,
And we've conducted two studies, published two articles on our findings. The reason, first of all, I was drawn to this group was because I was just teaching groups of teens, and there were teens in the classes that were questioning their gender.
mhm,
And I remember in particular one teen using the word self-loathing, using that way to describe how they felt about themselves. And that just kind of, I mean, it grabbed me. And it's like, we can't have this. We can't have these are our kids. We can't have our kids feeling like they hate themselves, you know?
mhm,
So that was quite a while ago because it took me a long time. I applied for lots of grants and it was not successful. And so it took a while. And finally, actually, we got to the point and I just said, look, we've got to run this study. And so we did it. And we did it all as volunteers. And um, what we found in that first study was lower anxiety, depression from pre to post, and also lower these two factors that are related to suicide ideation. One is thwarted belongingness, and the other is perceived burdensomeness. So, thwarted belongingness is feeling like you want to belong to this group and you're not accepted. And perceived burdensomeness is feeling like you're a burden to people around you, your friends and family. Both of those are factors that usually, when they're found together, there's usually suicide ideation going on. So we didn't, in that first study, we didn't measure suicide ideation, but in the second study, which was funded by American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, we did measure suicide ideation and um, did find that when these, from pre to post, and then we also did a follow-up, suicide ideation decreased significantly for this group. And we also found that self-compassion moderated the outcomes, meaning that those teens that were more self-compassionate had less suicide ideation, right? So they
right.
dropped more.
Yeah, such important work. And so, I mean, we know that self-compassion is good for teens and helps them a lot. What have you found are some of the blocks in particular that adolescents have? And of course, it may depend on, what community they belong to. But are they just the normal ones like that you see in adults is going to lower my motivation, for instance, or is there anything unique about the challenges that teens have with self-compassion?
Yeah, we have some of those blocks, the motivation block in particular.
Yeah.
We see because of the same reasons that we see it in adults, and that these teens are growing up in a society where they're told that in order to be successful, they need to beat themselves up. They need to really push themselves to an unbelievable extent. And otherwise, they're not going to be successful. They're not going to get good grades. They're not going to get into a good college. They're going to end up failure in life. And so
Yeah.
we we do go over those blocks, some of those misconceptions of self-compassion in our program. Um, I think maybe um, I would say the biggest block, though, or the biggest struggle, I don't know if I'd call it a block, is that, of course, parents are want their teens to um, many parents want their teens to take this class because they know it's good for them.
Mhm.
And they see the research, they know that it works. Um, but teens' job as teens is to push back. right? We know this. And
Oh,
so it's their job to individuate and to become their own person. And so they are not all teens, but often they're reluctant to jump right in because their parent or their therapist or some adult is suggesting it. Once they get over that hurdle, though, that initial hurdle, like the first class, they're like, okay, good. So many times,
I see.
so many times at the end of the 8-week class, teens have said to me, they'll pull me aside and they'll say, I didn't really want to come to this class. My mom or my dad or whoever thought it was a good idea. But you know what? I really liked it a lot. We hear that a lot. We hear it a
Yeah.
lot.
So I actually want to talk about both. So first, I want to pick your brain about the formal training that you've created and that's available, and then maybe come back to more informal, what parents and stuff can do in the family. But so let's start with some of the programs you've created and what is available. What does it look like? I know you've created a program for teens, a program for young adults, and then now this really exciting kind of adaptation of that for teachers in the schools. So can you just talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. So our teen program is 8 weeks, 90 minutes a week. We teach it online and in person. There are 8 sessions, I should say. We don't always teach it once a week. Sometimes we teach it twice a week for 4 weeks.
Okay.
That
Right.
seems to be a really good format that goes over well. Um, there is, and this is where it differs from the adult program, there is a little bit of art at the beginning of each class, 10 minutes. We make it really clear that, this is not about creating a great piece of art to hang on your wall. This is just about the process. It's actually mindful. Usually it's some kind of mindful drawing. Not always. There are sometimes that we do other things. There's a couple of music meditations. There's
Okay.
mindful movement. Um, the meditations are significantly shorter.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and we do, it's more activity based than the adult
Right.
program.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's the teen program as it was created, and now we have the program for schools, which is so I was really pushed to do this because from some colleagues, other mindful self-compassion for teens teachers, who said we've got to get this into schools because it's got to be available to all kids, not just kids whose parents can find out about it or have the money to pay for it. So the school program is shorter sessions, 45-minute long sessions. Uh, there are 16 different sessions. And then the part that I really like about it, and this was published in a book that I came out with, it just came out in June, is that there's also a series of sessions that are 10 to 15 minutes long. So we call these drop-in sessions. And really, the reason that those are in there is because we were training school counselors who said that they really don't always have 45 minutes to go in when they go into a class. Sometimes they just
Right.
have 10 minutes. So there's a section in the book that has these short 10 to 15-minute long sessions. So those are the two programs for schools.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the young adult program called Embracing Your Life, which is 6 sessions long, 90 minutes a session. And this is really being led by my colleague and your former grad student, Kristin, Marissa Knox.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so Marissa and I have been working on this for some time. We've trained 2 groups of teachers in this program this past year. And it has some of the adult program and has some of the teen program. And it also has some things that are specific for young adults. There's a piece on boundaries, for example, that Marissa brought in.
Right.
Um, yeah, and other things about being a young adult.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So and any like I don't know, interesting stories about how people change from these programs, or maybe any comments you had from adolescents or young adults, or
Yeah, we've had
I mean,
so
you have
many.
research, but I mean, anything more like juicy than just your significant findings.
I know research isn't so juicy, I know. Yeah, I love, yeah, some of my favorite comments. Well, I shared, with so many teens that have pulled me aside after
Yeah.
the program's over. It's like, I didn't think I was going to like this, but I really liked it. Um, One comment from one 15-year-old boy I remember, this was the second time he was taken to class. He said, and it was kind of the way he said it was like this realization, he's like, I don't care if people don't like me because I like me. And I just love that
Beautiful.
because, and everybody who was sitting there was like, oh, you like that was
Yeah.
just, and really, I love that because it's really what it's all about. It's about accepting ourselves for who we are, and as you know,
Yeah.
and knowing that we're okay as we are. And that doesn't mean that, there aren't parts of ourselves that we want or can work on, but it means that in a very fundamental way, just fine. We're fine the way we are.
Yeah.
And that's not the message that teens get in our world in many, many different ways.
Could
They
you
get the
imagine if
opposite.
you had learned that when you were a teenager, or if I learned that when I was a teenager, how different middle school and high school would have been.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel extraordinarily lucky that I did find, I started practicing, doing these practices, these contemplative practices when I was a teen by an unbelievable stroke of luck. Um,
How did that happen? You were just like,
oh,
what do you mean? It just like it happened? It doesn't happen on its own. What happened, Karen?
yes, yeah. So I had to do an independent study project for an English class, and
Okay.
the topic was due the next day, and I had no idea what I was going to do it on. And I was driving down the road. This is 1975. I was driving out down the road and I saw out of the corner of my eye a sign that said TM, right? Transcendental Meditation, which was big in 1975.
Uh-huh.
And I remembered hearing something about Zen and Zen meditation in my social studies class. And I remember that like there was something about that resonated with me. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to check this out. And I just turned into the driveway and they gave me some brochures and they said, come back on Saturday with flowers and a piece of fruit.
Okay.
I was like, that was my attitude. I was like, oh, all
Right.
right, okay, whatever. But anyway, that was the start of my,
Uh-huh.
they gave me a mantra and that was the start of my practice,
Uh,
and it dropped off at one point early on, but has been an anchor throughout my entire life, my entire adult life. And I feel extraordinarily lucky to to I mean it's very serendipitous,
yeah.
but sometimes that's how things happen, it's how yeah, but that's what happened. And self-compassion actually, when I first started, um really my first touch with self-compassion was in the 90s when I was part of a meditation group that met weekly, and we were passing around this cassette tape called Poems of Self-Compassion by David White. Are
Wow.
you familiar with this? It's now
Yes.
like,
Uh-huh.
it
Uh-huh.
wasn't CDs. Now I'm sure it's like MP3 or whatever. But um, I had little kids at the time and who wouldn't take naps. And so I would have them in the car and I put that cassette tape in and I would listen to these beautiful poems of self-compassion and drive a lot, hoping they'd fall asleep.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so these poems, parts of them became internal. I listened to it so much that they really um, became a part of me, became internalized. And so I think that's when, a decade or so later, when I started reading some of your early research when I was in grad school, I was like, it kind of, there was some, it resonated,
Yeah.
because I had that, those, poems of self-compassion in me.
And so you're a parent, and I'm sure many people on this call are parents, or we also have teachers and all sorts of people. But uh, so you said that if you're a parent and you kind of try to get your kid interested in self-compassion, it might hit some resistance. So what can parents do? What's the best way, or what are some various ways parents might try to teach their kids to be more supportive of themselves?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing and probably the most important thing that they can do is practice self-compassion themselves. Um, so, you know, if they're here, they're part of your self-compassion community. That's a great place to start. Um, but you have to model it in order um, to help your child because your child and even your teen, even though they don't look like that they're paying attention to us as parents, as adults, they are. So the first thing to do is really to learn how to be more how cultivate self-compassion in yourself and to model it, right? Um, and then the second thing I think that's really important is to do your own awareness practice so that you notice where you're being triggered. And I always say parenting is the hardest job in the world. There's nothing harder than being a parent. And there are places that we all get triggered. My kids now are almost 30. My younger daughter will be 30 in a couple weeks, and my other daughter's 32. There are still times, I don't know if I'd say I get triggered, but there's still times where I notice my own stuff coming up, my own needs that come up and come in the way of really being more present for them. And I think that's true of all of us. So I think a really important thing that we need to do is to notice where we get triggered and then start exploring that and asking ourselves the questions like, what's going on here? Why am I getting triggered? Why am I getting annoyed at this? Why am I getting angry? Um, what I have found from my own personal exploration is that it often goes back to my own childhood, my own unmet needs. Um, and whether in my case it's often, need to, be a really good mom. It's really important to me to be a good mom, but sometimes that need, which is my need, can get in the way of my kids' needs. So it's a good thing, the desire to be a good mom, a good parent is a good thing, but it takes some careful self exploration, self examination, exploring to awareness, to bring those things to the fore.
And then, so if a parent, let's say you do maybe have a conflict with your child and you notice why I'm triggered, what's coming up for me, would you suggest using that with your kids, like talking about, okay, when I'm sorry I got reactive, but this came up for me. I was worried about being a good parent. I'm trying to give myself, compassion for this, as a way of modeling it for
I
your
think
kids?
I think it depends on a lot of things. I think it depends on
Okay.
the age of your kid. I
Okay.
think it's more
Mhm.
appropriate for kids who are older. It depends
Right.
on what the nature of it is. It depends on your relationship with the kid.
Okay.
I'll just share one thing that happened about a month ago with me and this is my older daughter who's 32. I apologized to her for um, something that I had done a decade and a half ago when she was a teen. And it
Uh,
was it was one of those places where my needs were getting in the way of what she really needed at that time. my need to, do what I thought the responsible parent should do. So, would it have been appropriate for me to do it, say at the time? Probably not, but
Right.
now at this point, yes. So there's a lot of,
Right.
there's no clear answer here, unfortunately.
Okay. And then just real quickly before I want to open it up, so the modeling, having self-compassion is important. But if you were to teach one practice to your teen, let's say they were open, what would be your go-to thing to start with the teen?
I think the first thing that I would do is comforting gestures. So
The
this is
physical
some
gestures.
physical, yeah.
Mhm.
So this is something that really goes over well with teens and is really easy. It's very simple. And do you want me to go through it, or do you want to go through it, Kristen? Or
Go ahead, go for it. I
okay.
mean, just
So
people probably kind of know, but especially also for a teen, because I'm thinking like it's hard enough for an adult to do this, but a teen may be like, oh my God, you know,
well, we do
roll
it
their eyes.
we do it a little bit differently with teens. So the
Okay, yeah.
first, so
So
the
show us how you do it.
okay, so the first thing I always explain why we do this, and that there's a physiological response, and I think that gets you some buy-in.
Right,
There's something that actually goes on in your body when, for example, you have a friend who's feeling, bad about something, you don't think anything of giving them a hug, right?
right.
Or putting your arm around them or patting them on the back. You even do it to your cat or dog.
Mhm.
Your
Good point.
dogs, you're feeling bad, you pet your dog, pet your cat, right? So we do these physical gestures because there's actually a physiological response that goes on in our bodies when we do it, and it makes us feel good. There's a release of, we don't say hormone with teens because they'll go into, ooh, sex hormones, right? So say, I usually just say a chemical that's released.
Chemicals. Okay.
That makes us feel good and it makes the other person feel good, right? So I'm going to take you through some of these physical gestures so that you can try them out and maybe find one or two that work for you that you're comfortable doing, right? So so I start with that preface, and then we usually start with something that's away from the body. So we'll start with like just rubbing your hands together, and notice how that feels.
Mhm.
Maybe noticing a little bit of warmth. Okay, see what that feels like for you. And then maybe putting one hand on your forehead, on the other hand on the back of your neck. And see how that feels. Maybe just stroking one arm with the other hand, or maybe stroking both arms. And notice what that feels like. You can even try giving yourself a little squeeze, a hug, and see how that feels for you. Or maybe try just stroking your cheek with one or two fingers. Or you can try cradling your face in your hands and see what that's like. Try just putting one hand on top of your heart. Notice what that's like. Maybe just noticing the slight pressure of your hand on your heart. Or maybe even two hands on your heart. really like this one because it makes me feel like my heart is protected. And we'll do the last one. The last one is just making a fist with one hand and putting it over your heart and putting the other hand on top. See what that's like. And then we would have a discussion about, anybody find one or two that work for them. And then
Mhm.
there's an explanation of, you can take this with you when you're starting to feel stressed. You can do one of these gestures. And so, yeah.
Lovely. That felt good.
Yeah, you can see it moves a little bit more quickly than it does with adults.
Yeah, yeah.